Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's J-Man. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm J-Man.
And I'm number one fan, Tim.
A topic that I have brought up multiple times or with multiple stories on different episodes is civil asset forfeiture.
I do recall talking about it a few times, yeah.
Okay, you know what it means.
Yes.
You get arrested, they take your shit.
And they sell it for their own profit.
Yes, basically.
Or, in case that have been documented, the cops divvied up amongst themselves.
Yeah, if they're real pieces of shit, they'll do that too.
Yeah.
It's happened. I mean, look at the Metro Gang Task Force or Metro Gang Strike Force. Whatever they were, they're not a thing anymore. They got disbanded for that practice. Like fucking season TVs and all kinds of shit out of drug dealers' homes. Which, it's fine, they're drug dealers, but you can't just go all willy-nilly and grab somebody's shit because you think, oh, maybe it's tied to drugs, or we're going to take everything. Like, jail time is punishment enough without being basically robbed by the police.
Yeah, but I mean, if they're in jail for 5, 10, 15 years, I think I pay for all that shit anyways. You know, they're going to lose their house. Can't make a house payment when you're in jail.
Well, that's up to them to figure out after the fact, not to have it all pulled out from under them before they're even convicted.
Before they're convicted, yes.
That's what happens. They take their shit, they, quote, hold on to it, but immediately you would have to sue. It would be flat screen TV versus them, you know, the arresting body.
Yeah.
So it's totally fucked. And here's a case that I saw like a week and a half ago. The Supreme Court on Wednesday took up a case from Indiana to settle a question that might seem obvious to some. Does the ban on excessive fines in the Bill of Rights apply to states?
Ooh, good question.
The Eighth Amendment of the Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishments, and also excessive bail shall not be required nor excessive fines imposed. Last year, the Indiana Supreme Court upheld the state's seizure of a $42,000 Land Rover from a man who made two small drug sales valued at under $400. It rejected his claim that this was excessive and ruled the Eighth Amendment did not protect him. But that decision ran into sharp criticism Wednesday from the justices, who will almost surely be reversed. And I wasn't sure how I felt about this guy at first, but Justice Neil M. Gorsuch, he was the first one that Trump appointed, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I don't know who he did, honestly.
So if I'm getting my history correct, Gorsuch was the first pick that should have happened on Obama's watch, but the Republicans said, no, you're going out right now, so you don't get to pick, because they didn't want him to pick a liberal judge.
Well, yeah, Democrats pick Democratic liberal judges and Republicans pick conservative judges. I mean,
as opposed to picking somebody that, you know, is fair and balanced. So Gorsuch there, he immediately cut off the state's attorney before he could launch into his defense, and then basically scolded him for ignoring decades of court history and centuries of law. He's like, can we get this thing off the table? We all agree the excessive fines clause is incorporated against the states, meaning that states and cities must abide by just as the federal officials do. Mm-hmm. But the court struggled over the reach of the Bill of Rights in the 40s and beyond, he said. But that fight's long settled. So here we are in 2018 still litigating incorporation of the Bill of Rights. Really?
I don't know!
So he's basically like, what the fuck? And the state's lawyer refused to back down and insisted a state's seizure of private property was its business, not a question of federal law. So, yes, once again, we have federal law running into states' rights.
States' rights with federal law, yeah. Which, to me, one would say that the Bill of Rights should apply federally and by state, because that's the Bill of Rights of the people, not the Bill of Rights of the country. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, this guy saying that them taking his $42,000 SUV over a $400 sale and drugs, to me, is a bit excessive, and I don't think that should happen.
Yeah, well,
it shouldn't.
That lawyer said at one point the state would be free to seize luxury cars that were going a few miles over the speed limit. But then, suddenly the voice of reason by who? Am I reading this right? Brett Kavanaugh?
Drinking beer.
The guy who just really likes beer, and I drink beer, and I've never done anything that's remotely close to sexual assault or quasi-homoerotic with my drunken weightlifting buddies in college because I lifted weights because I'd like to drink beer.
I like beer.
That guy, right? He intervenes and he goes, isn't it just too late in the day to argue that any of the Bill of Rights is not incorporated?
Yeah.
So by the end of the hour, it was clear the justices would rule for the defendant, Tyson Timms, the Indiana man who lost his Land Rover, and will hold that the U.S. Constitution protected him from an excessive fine.
Which, to me, is exactly what should happen.
And I hate this next part, but it is not certain he will ultimately win his case, because Chief Justice John Roberts Jr. said the court would probably send the case back to Indiana courts to decide whether this forfeiture was indeed excessive and unjust. So here you are, wasting more time and money, going back to the same people that said, yeah, why the fuck not? Right? Like they're really going to sit there and question their own decision?
One would hope that they will, but I'm going to say they probably won't. I'd probably say like 99 out of 100 cases, they just go with the same ruling they had before, saying, we already tried this, we already ruled on it, it's whatever. Again, it's horse shit. Actually, at this point, the Supreme Court just takes that and be like, well, here's how this works. The Bill of Rights applies to the people. Regardless of the state, city, county, the Bill of Rights applies to everybody where they are.
And I will agree with that because that is my understanding as well.
That's exactly how I interpret it.
But then they fucking boomerang it back to the state. So this guy's probably going to get railroaded again, so nothing's going to get solved. But the fact of the matter here is that this whole argument revived the question that has kind of been going on for a very long time, especially before the High Court and its divided justices during the middle decades of the 20th century. So the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, were ratified in 1791 and began with the words, Congress shall make no law. The many familiar rights listed include the freedom of speech and the press, the freedom to exercise religion, the freedom to bear arms, the right to a jury trial, and the freedom from, quote, unreasonable searches and seizures, which I would deem taking a $42,000 Land Rover over less than $400 of probably marijuana as unreasonable.
That's extremely unreasonable. If anything, take his big screen TV. They're only like $400 or $500 now.
So as we're delving more into the history lesson, these protections for individuals do not go far. In the early 19th century, the court said that these rights applied only to actions of the then tiny federal government, not to states or local authorities, including police.
What?
So at the time, the Bill of Rights apparently only applied to the federal government's decisions. Even though, the states upheld the laws.
When you get to the whole church, the federal and state thing, it's like, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, that applies to everybody equally. If the states want to do something like, okay, well, you can right to bear arms, but we really don't want to have high-capacity magazines. Ooh, 30 rounds, that's high capacity. I think the state should be allowed to do that. It's just stupid. Doesn't solve anything.
By the way, I recently had my hands on several fully loaded 30-round magazines of AK-47 ammunition.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Were you at the range or something?
No.
What were you doing?
I was doing something for work, and that's all I can tell you.
Okay.
And it was fucking frightening.
Wow.
Sometimes you hear about people on the news, and thankfully sometimes those people that would have ended up on the news have their shit taken away before they can do anything to harm anybody.
Okay.
But back to the point. So now after the Civil War, Reconstruction Congress adopted the 14th Amendment to protect individuals from their states. So then it said, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So he had his trial, so there was due process of law, but it's not just that matter. It's a subtext underneath it.
No.
About how excessive that was. The first clause on privileges or immunities has meant surprisingly little, thanks to a peculiar 1873 ruling holding it did not provide any additional protection for individuals. But the second clause became the most important in the Constitution. In a step-by-step process from the 1930s through the 60s, the Supreme Court decided that nearly all the fundamental rights cited in the Bill of Rights were included or incorporated in the protection for liberty and due process of law in the 14th Amendment, but it has never specifically ruled on the excessive fee clause.
So, what is that? Just arguing that nobody gets to... There's no definition as to what excessive is?
I guess.
That's what it sounds like.
So it says, these days, however, most Americans would assume their constitutional rights are the same, whether they encounter a federal agent, a state official, or local police officer. Clearly, that's not the case.
I've always known it was different, but I didn't think it was that fucking different. I thought the Bill of Rights, like I said, applied to everybody.
And I'm going to get to a bigger overarching theme here. I mean, this is the trail of breadcrumbs I'm using to get to my point. So when Timms was told his $42,000 Land Rover could be seized by Indiana, he learned that part of the Bill of Rights did not protect him. He had been arrested for 2 drug sales to police informants that were valued at $385. He contested the state's seizure of his car on the grounds it was an excessive fine and grossly disproportionate to his crime. He lost late last year in the Indiana Supreme Court. And they wrote that we conclude the excessive fines clause does not bar the state from forfeiting defendants' vehicles because the United States Supreme Court has not held the clause applies to the states through the 14th Amendment.
I like it, Justice Slaughter.
Yeah, pretty much. Justice Jeffrey Slaughter. His opinion noted the High Court had suggested the excessive fines were probably unconstitutional, but had not said it so directly. So they're tap dancing around the issue. This is them using the ability for the states' rights to supersede federal law to do whatever the fuck they want. And this is why I feel our government's broken in one facet. True, we are the United States, and it's good that states have their own rights. However, the difference between the states, right? We have some states where medicinal marijuana is allowed. We have some states where marijuana is totally cool. And we have some states where if you get caught with marijuana, it's like you get caught raping a white baby with a black dick in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Or 40s, or 50s, or 60s. Probably the 70s also. But, it was a weird time.
Lots of psychedelic drugs.
So this is why I don't like how our government is set up. Obviously, we have the president, we have the different branches, we have the system of checks and balances, but it seems like there's far too much hokey bullshit where the actual governing process gets swept to the wayside by political agendas, sneaking in all this pork barrel legislation, and other shit. Like, you got a law about tax breaks for schools, but they try to sneak in other crap with it that's not related. I don't know how the fuck you can get away with that.
That's how they buy off people to vote for it.
It's so
That's
dumb.
The only way to look at it is, it's like, okay, yeah, this bill to give tax breaks to schools, when they purchase supplies, when they're purchasing school lunches and all that. But we're going to throw in there $550,000 for a library for a congressman in Indiana, even though the school system we're trying to deal with is in Oregon. That's how they buy votes to get these bills passed. Yeah. And I would be completely for a line item veto on all bills, so that president or whoever could go through there and be like, okay, I like this part, I don't like this part, it has nothing to do with the bill's name, or it should be, the bill says it's for farm aid relief, for farmers whose fields were desolated by floods. Nothing else should be in that fucking bill. Nothing.
I agree with you. I don't get how they feel that is a worthwhile function of our tax dollars spent paying them to just use partisan agendas to kind of sweeten the pot and whip up votes.
See, we wouldn't be running a deficit like we are if we, as you said, if we didn't have this pork barrel spending. If we weren't sending money overseas. There's a lot of fucking ways. They somehow try to make it seem like, well, we paid $500,000 for the library because that's going to create jobs. No, those guys who are working on that library already have a fucking job. You're just giving them more work to do, even though there's plenty of work out there.
Nobody's putting out a fucking wanted, like, do you want to build a library?
Yeah, it's just bullshit is what it is.
And you got some guy who's got like a divot in his skull from an industrial accident, shows up with his Bob the Builder toolkit, and another guy that spent most of his life fucking super gluing Legos together thinks he wants to give it a try, and then like an engineer. Like, all right, this is our team, I guess.
That a lot of engineers I met don't have a whole lot of common sense. It's like, it's ridiculous.
So what I'm saying is, what sense does it make for there to be potentially 50 different interpretations of federal law that the states decide they want to have it their way, creating what I'll call a liberal haven like California, where you've said in past episodes, like with the EPA. California has so stringently enacted anti-pollution laws that it's way the fuck overboard compared to most states, and that's what you feel the EPA is failing with by letting each state decide how they're going to dictate their laws or their guidelines. Like, oh, well, this state's only going to allow this much runoff and smoke buffering from the stacks coming out of a factory. But in California, holy shit, if you get caught with a plastic bag in daylight, they're going to literally nail you to a cross.
Yeah, thank God they're banning straws, because those are a major environmental hazard.
But like with the marijuana laws, states are decriminalizing marijuana.
See, and that I can understand, but
federally, it's still
Federally,
fucking scheduled and controlled and policed by the DEA, who will catch you selling this, and they will seize your plants, seize your edibles, seize your gummies, seize your whole stock from your store, take all the fucking money in the register and say, tough shit, bitch, Uncle Sam. So waggle that dick right in your face. Federal
one
law.
would say it's okay. If it's going to be where each state has its own interpretation, is it still necessary to have a federal government? Or at least as overreaching and broad as it is. I mean, if you ask me, government's too damn big as it is. You know,
I would take the word united out of United States then.
The states of America?
Basically, because like you said, fuck federal law, we're going to do it this way. And if there's that many different interpretations, that many different kinds of one law with different punishment lengths, you know, there's no strict, there's federal guidelines for if somebody goes to prison for drug crimes because you committed it federally, all right, the FBI got involved or the DEA got involved, which sucks because, like I've said in the past many times, it's unfair that they get to make the laws and enforce the laws. So they pretty much just call their own shot every time. Home field advantage. Mm-hmm. But, dear sweet God, now you've got all these states that, look at all the different abortion laws. The Supreme Court ruled in Roe versus Wade that abortion is okay.
Yep.
But we've got all these fucking backwater Bible Belt states and shit. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. Well, what is the point of having the United States if we're not united?
As far as I know, there aren't any states that have outright done away with abortion. Is there a state that it's illegal in?
They have made such incredibly stringent guidelines that it has basically forced women to go out of state.
Which is the one episode we were talking about that we discussed this.
This is a long fucking time ago.
Yeah.
And God damn it, I don't even remember what state that was. Was it Texas? It sounds like something Texas would do.
Planned Parenthood was doing stuff in Texas, if I recall correctly, because people from flood zones or whatever or tornado-ridden areas didn't have a place to go for Planned Parenthood.
Right.
That was a while ago we discussed that.
Yeah, that was like all the way last fucking summer, 2017.
Yeah, but yeah, it's Roe versus Wade is settled. Federally, it's allowed, and honestly, I believe that the states should allow it. I mean, and again, put restrictions on. Well, it's our state, okay, yeah, well, we have to let abortions, but let's make it more difficult because we don't want people having abortions. Again, that gets in an area where there's no right or wrong answer. It's a double-edged sword.
You're getting into the realm of nothing's happening. Our entire government is set up so nothing's ever accomplished. Look at the election schedules. Look at the way it's set up with the term lengths. So there's always, like 1/3 of the Senate or Congress that's up for re-election?
They get elected, they spend 2 years doing their jobs, and they spend 2 years trying to campaign. Just so they get elected again.
So it's this constant fucking push and pull. It's a tug of war over a majority.
What would be favoring just increasing the term length, but you don't get to run again? I'd be all for that.
I would say, well, I've been saying this since the last time Rick Perry injected his 2 cents back in the 2016 presidential cycle, where he came out and said, I miss the days where you could not be a career politician. Like, our forefathers had jobs. They did other things. They were writers. They were inventors. They were scientists. They were teachers. They were this, that, and the other.
Yep.
And then they came and governed, and then they adjourned, and they went back to their life. It's not this constant need to sit there in Washington and have 2 residences and pay them for a whole year's worth of basic bullshit where we have extended sessions because they can't accomplish anything because it's all this fucking bipartisan prick waving across the aisle.
Well, then what happened? You gave them the power to give themselves raises, so now they make a lot of money and they don't have to have a different job. So I like the idea of term limits to 1 and just make it like 5 or 6 years. You know, you run for election, you win, you get to serve for 5 years, and then you're done. You don't get to fucking run for... You can maybe run for president, you know, like if you were a congressman, you could run for Senate. If you were Senate, you can run for president, but that's it.
When I knew what our options were, and I know obviously you did not care for Obama so much, is it a stretch to say that you outright hate him? Did you outright hate him as a president, or did you just disagree with some things?
I disagreed with a lot of what his plans were, because when he was campaigning, he was making all these promises. I was like, if he actually kept these promises, he could actually be a really good president. Mm-hmm. He would actually change things that a lot of people see are broken in the system.
My point being, I have said that it would be better if we had a ruler, a dictator, not a king. Right? Not some fucking maniac that punishes the people the way that the Kims do in North Korea. But you sit there and you think, okay, election cycles, 2-term. If you're a 1-term president, you're really not accomplishing shit because you're finishing up trying to clean the messes up of the prior administration and you're trying to do anything with your name on it. And if you're lucky enough to get that 2nd term, you can get done some of the things you want to do, but by the end of the 2nd term, you might as well fucking give up. It's lame duck the last 18 months as we're ratcheting up to the presidential election for the next guy that has already been fucking going for a year and a half anyway. So the term limit thing. So let's say you get somebody that has like 4, 5, 6 terms, and the people like them. People were like, don't you dare, Obama, and it was mostly the right, saying, don't you dare fucking mess with the Constitution to make it so that you can have excess terms. But really, that's what it... Stability comes from having one leader with one set of ideals and a supporting cast of cabinet members and lower electees that can be there to work on the issues, not on their own legacy.
Okay, yeah.
So the way that the election cycles are set up, so there's always so many people up for election that these big issues we keep kicking the can down the fucking road on some of them. And I'm sorry I can't cite examples and I'm overgeneralizing and it may sound like I'm just belching horse shit.
I'm following along where you are there.
But I really didn't. I'm shooting completely from the hip on this.
Well, again, I didn't really have much time to put thought into it either. But again, that's expand the term from, say, 4 years to 6 years. Okay? You get 1 term, so you don't have to worry about running for re-election. Okay? All this election process is taking place when you're not in office. You get in the office, you do 6 years, and you move on to something else. You cannot run again until the next election cycle. So you're not trying to campaign when you're supposed to be focusing on actual issues. And I think that should be for every level of government, right up to the president.
Right, where you spend half your term fucking trying to build up your donation base to run an election.
Yeah. See, it would eliminate all that kind of bullshit, in my opinion. So you served from 1992 to 1998 as a congressman. Well, from 1998 to 2004, you cannot run for office because that's your time off. In 2000, I lost where I was. 2004, you can now run for election to go be a congressman or a senator or a president. You know, you can
back down to governor, I guess,
or back down to governor. You know, you wait 1 term out. You sit out for a round, so to speak. If you really want to get back in there, if people really like you, they'll vote you back in if you run again. But I think you should have time off. There shouldn't be any campaigning when you're in office. Zip, zero, nada.
So tie it into what I said with the federal and the state rights, with the different laws and the different interpretations where people think the Constitution protects them one way and the state says, not so fast. We have our own state powers. and we're going to fuck you over the way we want.
It needs to either be the states are all do their own thing and we don't have a federal government and the states each do their own thing, but we're still united, or the government, and I mean, this is where it gets can get scary because some governments have done it in the past. They kind of oversee everything. Here are the laws. These are what the states are going to enforce.
Mm-hmm.
All right? With very minor changes. Like this law here, unreasonable forfeiture. And
it shouldn't
penalties.
matter what state you're in.
It shouldn't matter what state. The Bill of Rights applies to citizens everywhere.
Guns, property, free speech, abortion,
That's
marriage
it. Yep.
rights.
These are the issues that the federal government takes up. State governments, you can decide what speed limit you want on the freeway. You can decide how much pollution you want to let in your state. You can decide how much fireworks you want. You can decide all that shit. But we're, federal government, we manage this. The basic, unalienable rights of our citizens.
Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call It? At What Do We Call It? You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm J-Man.
And I'm number one fan, Tim.
And that's the end.